Do you feel the urge to move toward a more play-based practice and just don't know how to do it? Or maybe you're struggling to incorporate more child-led learning into your otherwise teacher-led program. The research is clear. Play is how children learn best during the early childhood years, but creating a classroom where play is the focus isn't always as straightforward as it may seem. I'm your host, Jen Zollinger. Join me as we explore the incredible ways that play serves preschool children and how to best implement it in your classroom. This is Play Before Pencils. Okay, this may be an unpopular opinion, and one that I probably wouldn't have agreed with years ago, but themes are so much work. Probably even more so now than when I first started teaching over 20 years ago, because back then we didn't have Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers. Our theme ideas came through the mail via a magazine publication called The Mailbox. Is that even still around? Maybe in digital form? I don't know. I do know that when the yearly Big Book came along, which was a compilation of the year's best ideas, it was on every teacher's wish list. I was super entrenched in themes as a new teacher. I'd have to go back and look at my plans, but if I remember right, I think I had a new theme every week for the first year or so. This may have been due to the fact that I didn't have enough ideas to sustain a single theme for an entire month, because no Pinterest, remember. But I was burning through them like crazy. My themes ranged from the typical, like transportation and holidays, to the niche, like mice and circuses. On the surface, themes might seem like a simple foundation to then teach academic concepts in a fun and engaging way. But have you ever considered that they might actually be limiting what your students are capable of learning? Think about that for a minute. In most classrooms, themes are teacher-chosen and teacher-directed. They are often little more than a vehicle by which we can plan lots of content ahead of time. It's convenient for us, but it neglects the interests of the children. It's impossible to plan ahead with themes and still honor their interests. If the ideal is child-led learning, then we need to truly lean into that by letting the children lead. We can't predict what their interests will be and when they will change. Now, I have given some thought to some of the ways that themes serve teachers. I've already mentioned one. They allow us to plan lots of content ahead of time, which is super convenient for lesson planning, right? They also allow us to work within the existing materials that we have in the classroom. And don't get me wrong, there's not anything inherently wrong with this. I plan things around the supplies that I have on hand all the time. But sometimes I find myself putting this above the needs of the kids in order to avoid another trip to the store or spending supply money that I don't want to spend. So I might take a look around my classroom and say, oh, I've got a ton of little terracotta pots left over from a couple of years ago, so I'm going to do a theme on growing or planting, and we can grow seeds, and I kind of center that around a supply that I already have in place instead of looking at what the kids are doing and going out and getting other materials that will support that. Themes also satisfy our need for creativity. There's no doubt about it. In today's day and age, there are an enormous amount of ideas for just about any theme that you can imagine. And it's a big business on like Teachers Pay Teachers to sell supplies to match a theme. Many teachers find that setting up their classrooms to match a theme is a creative outlet for them. And I'm all for creating an inviting space for children to learn in. Let's just make sure that it's based on their developmental needs and not our creative ones. I also spent some time considering ways that themes might not benefit the children. In my opinion, themes limit creativity. A lot of people might disagree with that statement, but hear me out. When we set the dramatic play center up to match a particular theme, the novelty can be a lot of fun for children. But it can become stale very quickly once that novelty wears off, and then we're left with children who struggle to think creatively because the materials at their disposal are so in the box, if you will. We've given them exactly what they need to exercise their imagination within the confines of the theme, and it leaves little room for their own imagination. Themes may not be relevant to a child's current interests or life situation. I think that this is one of the biggest arguments against themes. I spoke in the last episode about an experience I had where my students weren't into the theme I had planned, and I was left trying to convince them that they did want to learn about my chosen theme and trying to salvage the rest of a month of planning. In the end, it left me even more stressed out than if I had gone into the month without a plan at all. I can think of another time in another program I worked in where the theme for the month was community helpers. We had some little popsicle stick puppets that the kids could come up and hold while we talked about the job of each worker, and my students were so bored. One little boy finally blurted out, "Why do we even need to know this? My house doesn't even have a mailbox." And you know what? He was right. The context that these children knew most of these workers in was so abstract that it had little relevance to their lives at that time. Most of these kids lived in neighborhoods with community mailboxes, so they had never seen the postman deliver mail directly to their home. It was the middle of the winter, so few kids had been to a swimming pool and seen a lifeguard recently. Half of the kids didn't have a pet, so a trip to the veterinarian wasn't something that they could relate to. We were learning about community helpers because it was an arbitrary theme selected for the month, not because any of the kids had expressed a specific interest in any of those jobs. And one last thought is that themes don't create an environment where critical thinking can thrive. Think about it. When we plan around a theme, it is usually so teacher-directed that the children have little to no input. We're just handing the learning to them rather than letting them wrestle with ideas on their own. In order to take advantage of the rich learning experiences we want for our children, we have to embrace a more responsive and dynamic way of planning. This doesn't mean that we necessarily have to eliminate themes altogether, but that we let the children guide us to the themes through their interests. For example, I have a class right now that is very interested in art. I picked up on this a couple of months ago when I introduced a self-serve art cart to the classroom, and nearly every child in that class used the cart to create something meaningful to them every day. I saw that as an opportunity to introduce these students to some different types of art and see where they would take it. I grabbed some books from the library about different artists, and they seemed drawn to Henri Matisse. So we ran with it, and for about 3 weeks, their art took on the form of Matisse. Brighter colors, they were painting paper and cutting shapes and creating collage pieces. When the collage art started to take place at the front of their interests, we shifted gears just a little bit, and I brought in several books by Lois Ehlert to show how they could use their paper cutouts to create animals and different types of nature. I received the cutest little dog from one of my students that she had created entirely from cut pieces of scrap paper. There was so much creativity, and the kids were so engaged. For my part, half of the battle was simply being attuned and taking notice of where and how they were spending their time. Once I zeroed in on that, the rest was pretty simple. Gathering some books, making sure supplies were available, and continuing to be observant so that I could be ready to make a shift when they were. I lean toward a more Reggio-inspired practice in my classroom, where the teacher is seen as a co-learner with the children. This lends itself very well to being able to investigate right alongside my students and offer nudges when they seem stuck. But very often, they have little trouble just guiding their own learning right along. There's always the possibility that they don't want any interference, in which case I would just step back and let them continue as they are. If we consider how it might have looked different if, rather than following the lead of the kids, I had just decided that during the month of January our theme would be Henri Matisse, I still would have gathered books from the library to introduce the topic, but I also would have planned daily activities, often more than one, that were specific to the theme of Matisse. I would have planned centers around the theme of Matisse, and perhaps tried to think up snacks that complemented the theme as well. I would have been sure to plan some art projects. Almost certainly they would have been product art that resembled works from Matisse, and I might have even set up the dramatic play area as an art studio. Although with this particular theme, I may have opted not to do that since we already have a designated art area, but with other themes, you can really deck out your dramatic play center. All of this planning would have taken place beforehand, which is really convenient for me, but the gamble I'm taking is whether this particular theme would have captured the attention of the children. If it did, lucky me. If not, I've got some last-minute scrambling to do. Initially, it can feel a little tricky or even out of control to step away from the idea of planning a whole year or even a month at a time. But the benefits to the kids can be tremendous. Learning about topics they are interested in results in learning that goes deeper and sticks longer. Now, I'll be honest, even though I've let go of the practice of themes, and I love it, I don't think that they are the worst thing ever. If themes are keeping you afloat, hold on to that life preserver until you hit a point when you're ready to try something new. I don't ever want the ideas that I share here to feel overwhelming, and for many teachers, themes are the glue that holds their planning together. While you can make changes anytime, the beginning of the school year is a great time to make a shift in your practice. So I have a challenge for you. When school starts again in the fall, let your first month be theme-free and focus instead on building relationships. Learn about each of your students. Learn about who is in their family, including their pets. Learn about their favorite TV shows or who their favorite characters are. Learn about what their strengths and weaknesses in the classroom are. Do they struggle to fit in socially? Are they really drawn to art? Do they thrive when they take on the role of a leader? Building a strong relationship with each student in your classroom is the best way to gather so much information that will help you understand how to best support each individual student. My guess is that if you take on this challenge, you'll start to pick up on areas of interest that the class can then start exploring more in depth, and you'll be so busy supporting the children in their chosen studies that you won't even have time to give themes a second thought. Thanks again for listening. Remember to hit that subscribe button to continue learning how to bring more play into your classroom. Plus, get more tips on Instagram at play_before_pencils or at playbeforepencils.com.